What's up? This is Justin Isis. I'm here with James Nicholas, and we are the creators of the upcoming Snuggly Books poetry collection called Divorce Procedures for the Hairdressers of a Metallic and Inconstant Goddess. And we're just going to be talking a little bit about the book and, where we're from and what the book is about. So we'll just start off by introducing each other. I'll just start off with introducing James. And James Nicholas, like myself, is currently living in Tokyo, Japan. He's a video game producer. He's been in the industry for 15 years. Currently working at Bergsala Lightweight, famous for a Bushido blade on the Sony PlayStation. In the past, he's worked for Square Enix and Sega, where he worked on FIFA. And I'll just, could you just start off by introducing yourself, James?
Sure. So I think that's a pretty good introduction already. Pretty much covered most points. Again, I've worked in the industry for 15 years. I started off from the very bottom, worked my way up from QA, got myself into a design position, eventually up to a producer, and that's the position I've held for quite a few years now. So, working in Japan for Bergsala Lightweight. Bergsala Lightweight, it's a collaboration between two companies. One of them is Lightweight, which is famous for Bushido blade. It's a long company in Japan, probably 20 years now. And then the other company is Bergsala, which is a Swedish company and is the sole distributor of all Nintendo products in the Scandinavian region. They do other things as well, such as brown goods. But the merger of these two form this company. This is my third company in Japan. I've been in Japan for 4 years now and hoping to stay here for a lot longer. So, in terms of some of the products I've worked on, as Justin mentioned, I used to work at Intelligent Games, worked on FIFA for EA, which is a contract job for EA, worked with Sega for a long time, Square Enix. In Japan, this is my third company. I also worked in development and another publisher before.
Nice, thanks. Would you like to just talk a little bit about what you're working on at the moment?
Oh, quite a lot actually. Because we're a publisher, we're working on a bunch of products at the same time. So some of the products we recently released in Japan was Big Hero 6, so that's called Baymax in Japan. And then we also released the other Disney title, Frozen, which in Japan is Ana no Yuki no Jo.
Yeah, Ana to Yuki no Jo, right?
Yeah.
It's
so,
pretty big.
Yeah, it's pretty big. So we had advertising on Big Camera, so it's my first title has been actively promoted at Big Camera on the big screen there in Shibuya. And yeah, so what we do as Bergsala Lightweight is we develop products from scratch, so that's our own creations. So we're completely financing a product from its conception right through to its design and then release into the different territories. But then what we also do is we localize titles. So we pick up titles from Japan and release into the West, or we pick up titles from the West and we localize and release into Japan. So that's how the two Disney titles came about. We've got 4 or 5 products going out in the next few months from Japan, so they'll be releasing on Nintendo hardware. We've got a couple of original products which are really taking the most, how would I say this? The most, we're basically, I can't talk too much about it just because of the confidentiality,
right?
Whatever is going to come out. Yeah, there's some unique features we got in it, but we've partnered up with some car manufacturers, and we're combining with some of these Japanese aesthetics. So hopefully the product we get out should cater towards the West as well. But what we try and do is maintain that whole Japanese fast-paced action. So it's a couple of action games. They'll be out probably in April, one in December next year. So yeah, quite a lot actually.
Nice, yeah. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to playing these and just testing them out. One of the things that I would like to kind of introduce into this conversation is just the similarities between what we're doing. I mean, I'm mainly known as a writer, and you're mainly known as an artist, but yeah, also a video game producer. So I would looking back to where I came from, when I was 10, 12, 14 years old, the job you have now was basically my dream job. You know, I mean, I always wanted to. I spent most of my time, you know, as a kid playing, you know, NES, you know, and Super NES. I think a lot of people from our generation did. So I would just like to, you know, kind of before we get on to, you know, comparing what we're doing, I would just like to say, just ask you, you know, what would you say are your like real main influences with what you're doing now, or even just the main influences of what made you want to do this, or what your you would say your style is now when you're making these games?
Yeah, I think pretty synonymous with what you were doing growing up, playing NES, playing even Atari before that. But all of the good games were coming from Japan, and I really wanted to see what kind of environment that was able to create all of these wacky and unique games. If you were to look back, you might say that actually mushrooms had a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
Which is no longer legal in Japan. Before, it used to be legal in Japan, magic mushrooms.
Right.
You had these really crazy, wacky games. And there's tons of examples of these.
Yeah, like, I don't know if you've played Umihara Kawase, or if you've heard of that. It's definitely, if anyone's listening to this, and if this is, I don't think this is a game that ever made it to the West, but this is a very original grappling platformer, almost similar to Bionic Commando, but mainly intended for the Japanese market. Is one that is definitely pretty, I would say, like tripped out.
Yeah. I know that one. It's got a little grapple mechanic.
Yeah, it has a little.
The main character, kid, right?
Yeah, the main character is a little girl, and she uses a grappling hook to get over obstacles and stun fish. So yeah, it's a pretty tripped out game.
It's funny you mentioned that, because the company who created that is called Agatsuma, and they've actually filed for bankruptcy. So
yeah,
in the past couple of weeks,
I don't think it was ever very super profitable. But
no,
it's definitely kind of a, you know, underground influence, I would say. You know, and even something like Cho Aniki, you know, this
Aniki series,
super homosexual kind of shooter series, which again was something which probably not a lot of people in the West in the mainstream had much direct contact with, but apparently was coming out here and getting some traction. So it's definitely I can definitely see where you're coming from with that. Are there any other just specific games you could maybe drop that you would say really like influence your style or influence where you're coming from?
I don't know if it's really influencing my style as opposed to having a great respect for those type of products. Is the Ico series, so the Ico Shadow of the Colossus. Probably the game that I'm looking forward to most is also from the same director, and that's The Last Guardian.
Right.
But it kind of has this really fancy style to it, where everything, including the language they've thought of, and that kind of game, that's more recent. But even so, 10 years ago, let's say 15 years ago, that's a Dreamcast era, so it had a ton of really unique games like the Crazy Taxi series.
Yeah, Dreamcast was definitely, that was definitely one of my favorite systems, just for, just kind of the depth of quite unusual games. Whether that's something like Seaman, or, there's just some of these games, they just must have been, like, tripping balls when they were just coming up with this.
Yeah, Cosmic Smash.
Cosmic Smash, or, like,
for example.
Jet Grind Radio. There's lots of these games that were pretty amazing on the Sega Dreamcast. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. You mentioned, Shadow of the Colossus, and so I think with one of the main attributes of that director is just the role played by maybe non-linearity.
Yeah.
Freedom of the world. So, that's something I'm going to bring up again a little bit later as we talk about this. So just to kind of transition into that, looking back a little bit to where some of this may have come from, in the past, in the 1800s or whatever, there's this idea of the, total artwork, which at the time was the opera. You would say a fusion of, drama, fiction, music, costuming, architecture, design, dance.
Sure.
But, looking at it today, we would probably say the total artwork would actually be a video game. Just in terms of how much more complex it's gotten recently.
Right.
Taking on board, people like yourself, producers, art designers, directors, writers, people coming up with these, quite amazing worlds or, depth of storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at something like Grand Theft Auto, the latest game cost $100 million. How many hundreds of staff they had working on it? Probably had 1,000 people working on that project. And like you said, they've got writers, they've got script writers, they've got audio technicians, programmers. So pretty much the total package on that. The audio they've got hundreds of hours of audio from somewhere. Licensed music and stuff they've created.
Right.
Different genres. So yeah, it is pretty much a total package. Because you're pretty much simulating real life as well.
Right.
What you can do anything, right?
Right.
Total free movement, jump into cars. In some ways, it's more interactive than real life because you can do things you wouldn't normally do, right?
Right. So I would just like to ask, I mean, when you're designing these games, I mean, how do you, early games, even earlier RPGs were quite, linear. So when you're designing these games, how do you balance, linearity and non-linearity? How do you balance that sense of actual construction with giving the player freedom to explore the environment and just kind of chart their own course? How would you say you balance that?
That's a pretty good question. I mean, it all comes down to how open you want the world to be. In quite a lot of these worlds, even though you've got all this freedom, you can go anywhere. There are certain triggers, certain flags in the game that create another tree for you. So if you remember back in the day, we had the Fighting Fantasy books.
Right.
Where you could just basically play your own adventure.
Right.
So you can flip through the pages and go back through other pages, and then just choose which route you can go to. There isn't so much of that nowadays in terms of that kind of fighting fantasy book. But
right.
Yeah, it's basically trees. So you have a few dialogue trees, and then a few paths which also change the ending. And in that sense, it's definitely more involving than movies, because movie you'll probably have one.
Right.
You'll have one path, right?
Well, I mean, I would say the classic example for me would be Final Fantasy VI, where you have the world of balance, completely linear, almost like a movie that you're just playing through, and then the world of ruin, pretty much totally non-linear. So that, for me, that would be a classic example of getting that balance right, where it's pretty much split 50-50. But yeah, something like Shadow of the Colossus, you would have a more completely non-linear path just from the start.
It's non-linear, but at the same time, you only get one ending on that.
Right.
So in terms of the whole metagame and the story itself, it's linear, but in your normal interactions, it's very non-linear.
Right.
So you brought up Final Fantasy. I played Final Fantasy X, and everything up until pretty much the last boss was really linear.
Right.
But then you all followed this, all of your actions and choices.
Yeah.
It all made you go through one path.
Yeah.
But then towards the end, you get an airship, and then you can travel everywhere in the world. So it becomes really open world at that point.
Yeah.
Non-linear, you can choose to go back. But the story is still the same. There are some games, of course, with multiple endings, and some movies as well, right? You get alternative endings.
Right. Yeah, to maybe compare this again to writing. I mean, there's not really, the history of writing, literature is fairly linear. Recently, maybe within the past 50 or 100 years, you've gotten something like B.S. Johnson, a writer who released a book that was just a bunch of pages that weren't even bound in a box. You can just read it, and you can just read them in any order. Yeah, you can just read them in any order you wanted. Right. There are some fairly experimental kinds of narratives, books with multiple endings, things like that. But it's definitely something which feels a lot more kind of native to the video game environment, which again I would say is probably more unprecedented in terms of where maybe art is going in the future.
It's funny how you say that though, because a lot of people don't associate video games with being art, and a lot of creative people, they kind of look down on video games as a pastime for children, for example.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say that attitude is probably more prevalent in what we would say maybe older generations. I mean, I think probably for people of our generation, I mean, we pretty much just take it for granted at this point. I mean, I don't think it's really a question But I do think it is definitely becoming more increasingly apparent once we've reached this point where you need, pretty sophisticated and diverse development teams to even get these things made.
I mean, the processing power on these machines are pretty good nowadays. So you've got all of these blades of grass that flow through the wind, for example.
Right. Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I really don't game much anymore. But every time I do sit down in front of something new, I'm just blown away by just the level of just rendering and detail.
The detail in it.
It's pretty. I mean, I don't even want to play. I just want to look at it. It's pretty astonishing.
Right,
I would say.
Yeah. Also, with virtual reality that's coming out as well, it's even more immersive nowadays.
Yeah. Do you have any, maybe just kind of projecting that a bit more into the future? Do you have any ideas, again, maybe coming from inside the industry, as to where that's going to go in maybe 5, 10, 15 years?
I mean, the way every time something new like virtual reality comes along, everybody assumes it'll only be there for a little while. But virtual reality has been around for quite a while. It just comes through cycles of getting better and better.
Right.
So I'm sure we'll see more experiments of that, but I don't think traditional gaming will go away. People,
right,
when mobile gaming came about, for example, everyone was, oh, this is the death of console and PC gaming. But then all the hype for mobile development's kind of gone down now, and everyone's going back to consoles and PC development. So I can pretty much foresee that in the next 10 years it'll probably be pretty similar to what we're doing now. Better graphics, more interactivity. There'll probably be more devices that will make your experience more immersive.
Right.
And there's a lot of people experimenting with thought control on games as well.
Right.
So I think we'll just see more of that. I don't think we'll see anything that's huge, dramatic leap in the next 10 years. Maybe 20 years.
Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, I'm definitely interested to see where it goes. Okay, good. So, yeah, we'll try to transition a little bit more into talking about our book. Just to refresh, the name of this book coming out from Snuggly Books
it's a long one.
it's called Divorce Procedures for the Hairdressers of a Metallic and Inconstant Goddess. And, this is a poetry collection, and I am the writer, and James is the artist. So, yeah, we just went into this. I mean, I contacted James because I'd known him for a while, and, he came very highly recommended, and I was really happy with what he put out, the cover of this book. We collaborated pretty closely on this, so we're just going to talk a little bit about the book now.
Yeah. I mean, first thing to ask you is, how would you describe your book?
Yeah, I mean, it's just start off with its poetry. It's the first poetry book. I mean, I'm more known for fiction, but I've always been really into poetry.
This is your what book now?
I don't even know. Like maybe 4 or 5 or 6 or something. I mean, it's something like that. But it's I conceive this book as basically a series of religious hymns to various goddesses. Mostly from the kind of pre-modern era. Some of them are Japanese, some of them are Chinese, some of them are ancient Greek, Indian, right? So, yeah, I just wanted to create something that was very kind of incantatory, kind of connecting to my own, I would say, spiritual concerns, or some of the experiments and other experiences I've had with ritual magic, and just kind of these personal explorations of things like that. I've been looking to put out actual poetry book for a long time, and this just seemed like a good chance to do it. Snugly Slims, which are about 50-page books that can be poetry, short stories, fiction, essays, any kind of books. So it seemed like a good opportunity to finally just take this seriously and get it out.
Those slims, are they going to put it into a fat volume?
Yeah, they're each. I mean, I think the first one by David Ricks has already been released. So my book, Divorce Procedures, is going to be Snuggly Slim number 2.
Snuggly, it's a UK company, right?
Yeah, it's a company based out of the UK, and it's looking to publish translations of some classic decadent, or we would say experimental writers, and also just newer writers who are kind of working along the same lines. So yeah, hopefully the Snuggly Slim series is going to put out some interesting work coming out from now too.
Sure. So, just going back to the book itself, there's a lot of Mega Man and Final Fantasy references in there. Is there any particular reason for that?
Yeah, it's just something that came out naturally when I was working on it. I mean, I didn't want to take it too seriously. I mean, if you look at the history of a lot of poetry connected to the occult or connected to, ritual exploration, it's pretty heavy-handed. I mean, this would even be something like Aleister Crowley. I mean, it's pretty mechanical, pretty heavy-handed. So I wanted to just kind of, maybe modernize it, update it, loosen it up a bit, and also just give something that would maybe be a bit more familiar and at the same time you wouldn't expect. So yeah, using things
that's kind of contradictory there.
Yeah, well,
have you got some familiar elements?
Yeah, some familiar elements and some that maybe take you by surprise, but yeah, mainly it just came out naturally. I mean, again, if we're talking about Mega Man, if we're talking about Final Fantasy, I mean, by this point, this is just things that are sort of like our mythology, so pretty much I expect most people are going to get these references without too much trouble. And yeah, maybe they wouldn't. It's not something they would expect in the context, but I think it works out with what I'm trying to do.
Who would you, who or what other books would you compare this one to? Can you compare it?
Yeah, I could just talk about my influences maybe. I mean, I like a lot of older kind of modernist poetry.
Yeah.
Whether that's Wallace Stevens, Ezra Pound, Mina Loy, Robinson Jeffers, anything from that kind of early 20th century perspective. Especially when they're getting multilingual, Pound messing around with his pretty shitty Chinese. But yeah, especially when we're living here. I mean, we've both lived in some, a bunch of different countries where, I mean, whether that's you living in the Philippines, Japan, England, me living here, Italy, the U.S., Japan, Australia. So, we're living in this mix of, different, I would say, linguistic, signals or influence. So, yeah, poetry is about language, is about, the personal a bit more. So, a lot of those languages, I felt a lot more freedom to just let them out, whether I just felt like rhyming in Japanese or, putting in some Chinese characters or, some Greek or French or just whatever I wanted, so.
Was there any influence from the Japanese poetry style in there?
Yeah, I mean, I did it. I included a few tanka. I mean, Quentin S. Crisp is actually putting out a Snuggly Slim too, which is tanka in English. And I mean, I wanted to do that too. I mean, I saw him doing it, and I was just like, well, fuck it, I can do this too. But mine came out a bit different. I mean, they're almost more like curses or something. But yeah, I mean, that approach has definitely influenced me. I maybe even got it a bit more secondhand than him. I probably picked it up more through like Imagism and Ezra Pound and that kind of approach. Would probably be more direct influence on me. But yeah, I mean, living here, it's hard not to be influenced by that kind of approach, whether that's more historical tanka or haiku or even just Japanese rappers, or more recent kind of hip hop stuff that has maybe played in.
I mean, we were always hanging around and causing chaos across Tokyo, but we don't really talk much about your creative influences and what got you really into writing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've been writing, making things up honestly as far back as I could go. So I think my father's first language was not English, so he was always really pushing me from an early age to just get good at language and just take it.
What was his first language?
He's Italian, right? So he had to learn English as an adult. So he was always pushing me to just take it, almost hyper seriously and just get good at English and learn as many other languages as I could. So I've just been doing it since as far back as I can remember. But I do think along the lines of what you said, I mean, we're not exactly living in a place that is really connected much to the English publishing scene. So I think that gives us maybe a more, a bit of a original perspective. I mean, I can't think of any other writers around here. I mean, I think David Peace is somewhere around here, and there's maybe a few others, but it's pretty in terms of English language writing or creative art, I mean it is a bit isolated, but I think at the same time it does give us a pretty different, kind of more diverse perspective because we're so far outside of maybe the New York or London publishing centers that we can just do whatever we want and not really have to worry about it, which
it's like the Galapagos effect, right?
Yeah, definitely Galapagos, a little bit like that.
It can be so experimental, not influenced so much by whatever's the modern standard.
Yeah. To be honest, I mean, I would just rather have complete, total freedom to be as chaotic as I like, or just do whatever I want. Yeah. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, that creative freedom. I think that's something everybody kind of yearns for. Yeah. But you've got total creative freedom.
Yeah, well, I like to think so. I mean, we'll see where it goes. I mean, we have a few projects coming up next year. We have the Mark Samuels tribute anthology, which is called Mark to Die, which we actually just wrapped up doing the photo shoot for now. So let's bring in some writers I'm very interested in: Adam Neville, Simon Clark, Reggie Oliver, Quentin S. Chris, Brendan Connell. There's a bunch, right? So pretty excited about that to see what the future holds.
It's funny when you mention all these names, and how I know you is very different to all these traditional writers.
Yeah, I mean, look, honestly, like, we're not, I don't think we're both the kind of people that really, lives much in our industries or lives much in our, our art forms. I mean, we just live this kind of pretty, free kind of life. But yeah, I mean, but I do think that feeds into it, so. It's always, I'm always keeping my eye out for new material. I mean, it's a pretty interesting scene out here. Yeah. So yeah,
I mean, that's the great thing about being quote unquote creatives, because there's always something for us to look forward to, right?
Yeah, there's always
a story for us to make, something for us to write, something for us to create. One thing my boss is going through is kind of a change of life. Mm-hmm. I guess a middle life crisis, or some people say konenki, which is like female menopause.
Right.
There's a male version of that.
Yeah.
And for people like us, I think there'll always be something for us to.
Yeah, I mean that's the challenge. The challenge is to not repeat. I mean, I try to always, with every book I put out, I try to always do something totally different, or just do something that's pushing it. There's a lot of talk about genre recently. I mean, and to be honest, I mean, to me, genre just means you're lazy. I mean, that's all it fucking means to me. Is just, I'm not hardworking enough to come up with something that no one has seen before and no one's expecting. So, I mean, I just always just try to push it as much as I can and just do something that people are not expecting or that you can't even classify.
Right. So what are we looking forward to from you in the near future?
Yeah, like I said, we got the Mark Samuels anthology coming out next year. We got this book, Divorce Procedures, coming out. I mean, it's already out. I mean, you can even order it now. And end of next year, I have a novel called Invariant coming out.
What's Invariant about? It's a really cool title. You can't talk about it yet.
I can't.
You can't talk about it yet.
I can't even really talk about it. I mean, I just have no idea how to even just explain it. I mean, but it's I would say it's very broadly science fiction, but probably not in any way that people would recognize. But
at least the title's quite short.
Yeah, it's a short title, but I'm hoping to have that out sometime at the end of next year. So I think it's gonna be a pretty full on year for both of us next year. Good. So yeah, we'll probably wrap this up soon. I just wanted to ask you, James, look, if there's one artwork in, any medium, any genre that you would recommend to people at the moment, what would you recommend?
One artwork?
Yeah, just anything. Could be a game, could be a book, could be some music, could be anything.
What are we looking at? I think it's a really tough question because it's all very specific to the person, and people aren't looking at games nowadays. There are some brilliant titles out there.
Right.
And hopefully, some people will get off their high horse and just accept that games as a medium, they can be art as well. There's some beautiful projects like Journey. I would recommend Journey to anybody who hasn't played it.
Yeah.
It's less of a game, more of an adventure, more of a artistic playthrough.
Right.
And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the next game from the Ico series.
Right.
Which is supposed to be due out next year, but it's been developed for over 10 years now. I'm not sure quite why it's been going on for so long. But as an art form, I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
Completely, they've developed its own language for
Right.
all the characters. Visually, it looks amazing. Gameplay-wise, it looks amazing. It's very original.
Right.
So I'd recommend The Last Guardian.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. So, once again, I am Justin Isis, and yeah, you want to get in there?
No, I just wanted to see what would your recommendation be from the creative writing end?
I'm going to go in and say, I'm going to shoot out for David Ricks' Snuggly Slim #1. It's called Four Windows. This book is coming out soon. And yeah, David Ricks is a UK writer that's kind of coming up at the moment. He's actually running his own press called Ivanvale Press. It's putting out some good books. So I would like to recommend people check out the work of David Ricks coming out of the UK. Right.
Excellent. Okay.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, we'll wrap this up. Look. Yeah. My name is Justin Isis.
This is James Nicholas.
Good, right? So yeah, our book is Divorce Procedures for the Hairdressers of Metallic and Constant Goddess, right? So it's available from Snuggly Books. So yeah, check this out. All right.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
Bye.